There are moments in life when even the brightest lights suddenly flicker, when the people we thought could never break, finally do. And now, at 82 years old, something has happened to Christopher Walken that no one saw coming. For more than 6 decades, he was the man you could never quite understand, hypnotic, eccentric, untouchable. A legend who turned stillness into power, who could make silence louder than a scream. He was strange, magnetic, endlessly fascinating. But behind that famous stare was something no one ever noticed, a shadow that followed him everywhere. Today, that shadow has become heartbreakingly real. And what has come to light has left not only Hollywood, but the entire world in shock. People close to him say they never imagined this could happen. The same man who once danced through life with fearless energy, who made millions laugh, cry, and wonder, now finds himself surrounded by a silence so heavy, so tragic, that even those who know him best can hardly speak about it. Something has changed in Christopher Walken. Something the cameras never showed. Something that will leave you speechless when you finally learn what it is. At 82, the man we thought was invincible is facing a reality that feels almost too painful to believe. Friends describe it as heartbreaking beyond words. Families say the world will never look at him the same way again. But before we uncover the truth, before we reveal what truly happened, we must go back. Back to where it all began. Because to understand the tragedy of Christopher Walken, we have to first understand the man behind the myth. Christopher Walken entered the world on March 31, 1943, in Astoria, Queens, the middle of 3 sons in a modest immigrant family. His father, Paul Walken, was a hard-working baker from Germany. His mother, Rosalie Russell, was a Scottish immigrant who had once dreamed of becoming a star herself. It was Rosalie who saw something extraordinary in her boys. They had charisma, she would later say. They had something that belonged on a stage. Determined to give them a life she never had, she began taking them to auditions in Manhattan. Soon, the Walken boys were appearing on early television shows like the Colgate Comedy Hour and the Wonderful John Acton Show. Ronnie, as he was then known, didn't play with other kids much. His world was scripts, rehearsals, and the glow of studio lights. "I grew up in front of cameras," Walken once said. "It wasn't strange to me, it was home." But there was a cost to being a child performer. While other children learned freedom, Ronnie learned obedience. Every smile, every gesture had to be perfect. He wasn't allowed to make mistakes, not in front of casting directors, not in front of his mother. Show business, he would later reflect, isn't a place for children who want to be children. The Walken family's apartment sat above the family bakery, the smell of fresh bread mixing with the sounds of jazz from the radio. Rosalie filled the home with music and dreams, imagining Broadway lights while kneading dough. It was a small, loving household, but ambition was its heartbeat. Ronnie never forgot the feeling of being looked at from such a young age. The camera didn't frighten him, it fascinated him. He loved the feeling of transforming, of becoming someone else. He didn't yet know it, but that fascination with transformation would define his life. By his teenage years, Walken was already a seasoned performer. He studied dancing, trained in acting, and joined local theater groups. He had no idea what it meant to be normal. But he knew what it meant to be seen, and that for him was enough. In later interviews, Walken would confess that his childhood was both beautiful and strange. He learned discipline, creativity, and confidence, but at the cost of innocence. He would forever carry that strange duality, the performer who craved privacy, the man who found comfort only in pretending to be someone else. The spotlight had been his cradle. It would also be his cage. The world rarely understands what it takes to be a child performer. Fame comes before identity. Applause replaces affection. And when the lights dim, silence can feel unbearable. For Christopher Walken, that silence was both terrifying and intoxicating. By the time he reached high school, he had already appeared in numerous TV productions and was beginning to see the industry for what it was, a world that celebrated faces but ignored hearts. At 16, Walken was cast in a touring production of a musical. For the first time, he experienced the electricity of a live audience, the applause that filled a void he didn't know existed. But when the curtain closed each night, he felt empty. "It's strange," he said years later, "how the sound of applause fades so quickly." He was growing into a young man with striking features. Sharp blue eyes, a cold grace, and a presence that seemed both alluring and unsettling. Yet behind those eyes was a boy still trying to figure out who he was. As Walken's career expanded, his relationship with his mother became more complicated. Rosalie's dream was for all 3 of her sons to become stars. But Christopher, still Ronnie to her, began to rebel quietly. He wanted to perform, yes, but he wanted to feel something real. "I didn't want to just act," he said. "I wanted to understand why we act." In his late teens, Walken worked briefly as a lion tamer in a circus. It sounds like a joke, but it's true. He once told Interview magazine, "I worked with this lion named Sheba. She was very sweet. I'd go into her cage and she'd just lick my face. I wasn't brave, but I loved it." The lion taming became a metaphor for his life: beautiful, dangerous, and never truly safe. When he enrolled in Hofstra University to study English and drama, he was already restless. Within a year, he dropped out to pursue acting full-time. His stage career began in earnest, but the transition from child star to serious actor was brutal. Casting directors saw him as odd, unpredictable, too intense for some roles, too quiet for others. Walken didn't fit the mold, and he never tried to. "I was never handsome in the traditional sense," he admitted. "I wasn't the romantic type. I was the guy who made people uncomfortable." But discomfort for Walken was a kind of truth. He began to build a reputation in the theater world as a performer who didn't act, he inhabited. His movements were deliberate, his voice like music. He didn't copy others, he moved to his own rhythm, literally. He once said, "I think like a dancer. Acting for me is choreography, every word, every pause, every look." This discipline, part dancer, part poet, part philosopher, set him apart. Yet it also alienated him. In a world of polished Hollywood types, Christopher Walken was an enigma. By the time he turned 20, he had already lived a dozen lives: child actor, student, lion tamer, stage performer. And though his star was just beginning to rise, the isolation that had shadowed his childhood had not left him. He could charm an audience but not a room. He could embody emotion on stage but struggled to express it in real life. And somewhere deep inside, he knew, fame would never fill that void. The tragedy of Christopher Walken was already being written, quietly, invisibly, in the space between who he was and who the world wanted him to be. For Christopher Walken, theater was not just an art form, it was a sanctuary. When the clamor of television and the chaos of film sets became too much, the stage offered something pure, something human. It was a place where he could breathe without pretending, where the applause wasn't for fame, but for truth. In the early 1960s, Walken immersed himself in the New York theater scene. It was a rough, uncertain world, filled with rejection, cigarette smoke, and endless rehearsals in cold rehearsal halls, but it was real. He performed in plays that barely paid the rent, but each performance brought him closer to understanding himself. He joined the Washington Square Players, performing alongside other young dreamers who would later become the backbone of American theater. Walken wasn't the loudest in the room, but his presence was magnetic. He had a way of standing still that made audiences lean forward, as if something dangerous or profound might happen at any moment. It was during this time that he met the woman who would change everything, Georgianne Thawn. She wasn't a typical Hollywood type. Georgianne was calm, self-assured, with an eye for talent and a quiet grace that matched Walken's eccentric energy. She worked as a casting director, helping others find their place on stage. When their paths crossed during a theater production, there was an instant connection. Not the blinding flash of passion, but the steady warmth of recognition. They began dating quietly, sharing evenings over cheap coffee and long walks through New York's theater district. While others chased fame, they found joy in simplicity. Walken once described their relationship as two people who didn't need to talk much. Georgianne understood his silences, the pauses that made others uncomfortable. She knew his eccentric habits, his fears, his discomfort with small talk. She didn't try to change him, she simply gave him space to exist. They married in 1969, in a small, unpretentious ceremony that mirrored their lifestyle. No celebrity photographers, no grand headlines, just two souls promising to stand together in a business known for its instability. Their love story became one of the quietest and strongest in Hollywood. They never had children, a decision they both made early on. Walken explained, "I'm fine with that. I have my work. That's enough." And Georgianne has always understood. While many actors lost themselves in the chaos of fame, Walken found balance in Georgianne's presence. When he returned home from long shoots, she would be there, grounded, calm, with their cats curled up at her feet. The stage gave him purpose, but Georgianne gave him peace. Walken's performances through the 1970s, in plays like The Lion in Winter, Coriolanus, and Hamlet, became electrifying, unpredictable, and deeply emotional. He was not yet famous, but his peers knew they were witnessing something rare. He moved with the precision of a dancer and the weight of a philosopher. Critics called him mesmerizing. Directors said he was impossible to direct, but worth every moment. He had become more than an actor, he had become an experience. And though the stage was his first love, destiny was already pushing him toward the camera. Toward a role that would forever define him and forever haunt him. Hollywood has never known quite what to do with Christopher Walken. From the moment he stepped onto a film set, he carried an energy that defied convention. A strange blend of danger, charm, and melancholy that no one could imitate. In the early 1970s, he began appearing in small but memorable film roles. He was the kind of actor who could say a single line and make it unforgettable. Directors began to notice. Woody Allen cast him in Annie Hall, 1977, where his unsettling cameo as Annie's disturbed brother left audiences both laughing and unnerved. But it was The Deer Hunter, 1978, that transformed him from a talented unknown into an Oscar-winning phenomenon. The film, a brutal, unflinching portrayal of friendship and trauma during the Vietnam War, demanded everything from its cast. Robert De Niro, Meryl Streep, and Walken shared an intensity that bordered on dangerous. For Walken, who played the role of Nick Shevotorevich, the gentle soul broken by war, the performance was more than acting, it was a descent. To prepare, he isolated himself for weeks. He lost weight, lived in silence, and avoided social contact. "I wanted to feel what it was like to disappear," he said later. When filming began, his performance stunned everyone. Every scene felt real, as though he wasn't performing but remembering. The infamous Russian roulette sequence became one of cinema's most haunting moments, a perfect storm of terror, fragility, and heartbreak. When Walken won the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor in 1979, he accepted it quietly, almost awkwardly. Fame never sat comfortably on his shoulders. "It's nice," he told a reporter, "but it doesn't change much. Tomorrow, I'll go back to work." The world saw him as a mysterious genius, the man who could turn stillness into suspense, who made silence feel deafening. But behind the mystery was exhaustion. The success of The Deer Hunter made Walken one of the most sought-after actors in Hollywood. Yet, he didn't chase the spotlight. He turned down leading roles that could have made him a superstar, choosing instead to play characters that felt real, strange, vulnerable, tragic. Directors found him unpredictable, one minute hilarious, the next chilling. But that unpredictability was his art. "If I surprise myself," he once said, "I know I'm doing it right." By the 1980s, Walken had become a cinematic enigma, a man who could terrify, charm, and confuse audiences all at once. But behind his eccentric brilliance, he carried a quiet sadness. He never bragged, never sought attention, and rarely gave interviews. Fame was something he endured, not embraced. And soon, that fame would lead him into one of the darkest chapters of his life, a night that would follow him forever. After The Deer Hunter, Walken found himself haunted by what he'd created. The role had taken something from him, something he couldn't quite reclaim. "I don't think I ever came all the way back," he admitted years later. "That film, it stayed in my bones." He had played a man broken by war, and in some quiet way, he became one. The trauma of Nick's story seemed to echo Walken's own isolation, his discomfort with the modern world, his sadness for things lost. His performances after that, in Heaven's Gate, The Dogs of War, At Close Range, all carried that same haunted energy. It was as though he could no longer play anyone not broken. Hollywood has always had room for charm, beauty, and predictability, but Christopher Walken was none of those things. He was odd, eccentric, unsettling, and absolutely unforgettable. Directors and audiences alike struggled to categorize him. Was he a villain? A comedian? A philosopher trapped in the body of a movie star? The truth was, Walken didn't fit into any category because he never tried to. From his voice, that hypnotic halting cadence, to his sharp deliberate movements, everything about him seemed designed to defy convention. Even the way he paused between words made people lean closer. It wasn't an affectation, it was rhythm. It was control. "I don't talk like other people," he once said. "I don't even think I could if I wanted to. It's just me." In films like The Dead Zone, King of New York, A View to a Kill, and Batman Returns, Walken built a gallery of strange, mesmerizing figures, men who could terrify with a whisper or make you laugh in the middle of horror. He didn't play villains in the traditional sense, he played men who believed they were right. Each role felt like a glimpse into another dimension of his soul. Darkly comic, elegantly sinister, or heartbreakingly human. But behind that brilliance, there was a private struggle. Walken didn't like interviews. He didn't enjoy fame. He often said he didn't watch his own movies. "Once it's done," he explained, "I don't look back. I'm not interested in seeing what I've already done. I'm interested in what comes next, or nothing at all." Hollywood misunderstood that detachment as arrogance. But it wasn't. It was protection. Walken's strange mannerisms and distant persona became a kind of armor, a way to hide the private man who was fragile, reflective, and uncomfortable in crowds. He once said, "I'm a very shy person. People think I'm strange because I don't say much. But silence is just how I breathe. As the years passed, Walken's reputation grew from curiosity to legend. Younger actors worshipped him. Comedians imitated him. Directors like Quentin Tarantino and Tim Burton called him a force of nature. Yet even as he became an icon, Walken remained a mystery. To this day, no one really knows what he's thinking when the camera rolls, only that when it does, the world seems to stop breathing. And maybe that's why the tragedy of Christopher Walken feels so profound, because even after 8 decades, the world still doesn't truly understand him. Long before Christopher Walken was an actor, he was a dancer. It's something most people forget, but it's the key to everything about him. The way he moves, the way he speaks, even the way he breathes on screen. As a teenager, he trained in musical theater and studied dance with the same seriousness he later brought to acting. He idolized Fred Astaire, admired Gene Kelly, and believed that rhythm was a kind of truth. "Dance," he said once, "teaches you how to move through life." You can see it in every role he's ever played, that almost otherworldly grace. Even when he's still, his body hums with tension, as if there's a song only he can hear. And occasionally, he let that music out. In 1981, in the film Pennies from Heaven, he performed a tap dance sequence that critics still call one of the most surprising moments in cinema. Later he'd dance again in The Prophecy, True Romance, and most memorably in Fatboy Slim's music video Weapon of Choice, 2001, where an aging Walken defies gravity in a lonely hotel lobby, floating, spinning, and gliding like a man possessed by freedom. That video, directed by Spike Jonze, went viral long before viral was even a word. Suddenly, a new generation discovered him, not as the scary guy from the movies, but as the man who could make movement look like poetry. And then came Saturday Night Live. Walken's appearances on SNL became legendary. His impeccable timing, his fearless commitment to absurdity, it was comedy elevated to performance art. In sketches like The Continental and the unforgettable More Cowbell, he became a cultural phenomenon all over again. "Guess what? I got a fever," he said in that now iconic sketch, "and the only prescription is more cowbell." Audiences roared. They saw the humor. But few noticed the melancholy underneath. Even as he made people laugh, Walken's humor had a quiet sadness, the kind that comes from understanding that laughter and pain are two sides of the same rhythm. He wasn't mocking life, he was dancing with it. In interviews, he often spoke of his fascination with mortality. "I think about death a lot," he admitted. "It doesn't scare me. It just reminds me that everything is temporary, every role, every person, every heartbeat." Walken's dance wasn't just physical, it was existential. Every movement, every glance, carried the weight of time. And at 82, the rhythm that once set him free now feels slower, heavier, but still beautiful. Because even when his body weakens, his spirit still dances in every memory left on film. By the 1990s, Christopher Walken had quietly stepped away from the glitz of Hollywood's center stage. He didn't retire, he just disappeared a little. He continued working, of course, always on his own terms. Roles in Pulp Fiction, Sleepy Hollow, Catch Me If You Can, and Man on Fire reminded the world that his power hadn't faded. But Walken was no longer chasing hits or awards. He was choosing stories that reflected his inner world. Strange, quiet, philosophical films that few understood but all remembered. The man who once embodied chaos now sought peace. He spent most of his time away from Los Angeles, preferring his home in rural Connecticut with Georgianne. Their days were simple, walks through the countryside, tending to their cats, watching old movies together. Fame had become a distant echo. When asked about the change, Walken smiled softly and said, "I like quiet things. I like routine. I get up, I read the paper, I feed the cats. That's my life. And I love it." He didn't use email. He didn't own a cell phone. He rarely went out. "The world moves too fast," he said. "I don't want to chase it anymore." In many ways, this was his most peaceful period, and yet, it was tinged with sadness. Friends noticed that Walken seemed nostalgic, even mournful, for a world that no longer existed. The old Hollywood he had known, full of character, risk and art, had been replaced by franchises and formula. "It's not the same," he admitted. "There was a time when acting felt dangerous, alive. Now everything feels safe. And that's not art." But rather than complain, he withdrew gracefully. He would act when a story touched him, otherwise, he preferred silence. When a journalist once asked him if he ever regretted not having children, Walken's answer was honest and haunting. "No. But sometimes I think about what it would have been like. Maybe I was afraid of it, afraid of bringing someone into a world I didn't understand myself." The 1990s and early 2000s became known as Walken's quiet renaissance. He appeared in dozens of films, often stealing scenes with just a glance. His performances were stripped down, less theatrical, more human. And through it all, Georgianne remained his anchor, steady, calm, devoted. Together, they built a small life away from the noise. And while others saw a recluse, Walken saw a blessing. "I've been in this business long enough to know that fame is temporary," he said. "But peace, that's rare." The tragedy of growing old in Hollywood is not the wrinkles or the fading roles. It's watching the world move on without you, as if your lifetime of art were just a chapter in someone else's story. At 82, Christopher Walken feels that truth deeply. The blue eyes that once burned through the screen now carry a softness, not weakness but weariness. He still works occasionally, taking roles that interest him rather than ones that promise fame. But every year, he retreats a little further from the spotlight, as if rehearsing for an exit he knows is coming. In interviews, he speaks often of time. "I used to think I'd live forever," he said once. "Now I realize I've been saying goodbye for a long time." He never had children, not because he disliked the idea, but because he feared loss. He had seen too many lives destroyed by the demands of fame, too many hearts broken by absence. "I didn't want to be a father who's never home," he said. "And maybe I was scared of loving something I couldn't protect." That fear, perhaps, is his deepest tragedy. The man who gave the world unforgettable performances, who made millions feel something, chose solitude out of love. He sacrificed the noise of family for the silence of safety. Now, in his later years, Walken lives in that silence. He reads, he cooks, he paints. He watches the birds outside his window and thinks about his friends who are gone. Natalie Wood, John Cazale, Robin Williams. "They were all beautiful," he says softly. "And they all left too soon." Hollywood rarely looks back, but those who do know what he gave it, an entire lifetime of strange, transcendent humanity. Behind those famous eyes lies a story not of scandal, but of survival, a man who endured the cruelty of fame and the ache of time, and somehow remained true to himself. The pain behind Christopher Walken's eyes is not sorrow for what he lost, it's sorrow for what the world no longer sees. And in that quiet, as he sits beside his wife in their peaceful home, surrounded by old memories and the soft hum of life fading into twilight, one truth remains. He never stopped dancing. He just learned to do it in the dark. Fame has a strange gravity. It pulls people in, then destroys those who stay too long. Christopher Walken learned early how to step away before it swallowed him. In recent years, he has become almost invisible. No social media. No award show appearances. No Hollywood parties. He rarely gives interviews, and when he does, his answers are as cryptic as poetry. Asked about fame, he simply says, "I had enough of it." He still acts, occasionally, but only in roles that intrigue him. In 2022, he appeared in Severance, the surreal Apple TV series that explored identity and isolation. It was a fitting choice, a story about disappearing into yourself. Critics called his performance achingly human. After filming, he retreated again to his Connecticut home. He stopped traveling long distances. He no longer drives. His world has shrunk to the things he loves: his wife, his cats, his garden, and the faint echo of music from his youth. Locals sometimes spot him at a diner, sitting alone by a window, eating eggs and toast. He nods politely if recognized, but conversations rarely go beyond a smile. Some fans worry about his health, his frail frame, his slower walk. But those who know him say he is content. "He's just living quietly," one friend explained. "He's earned that right." He once told a young actor, "If you can, disappear while people still remember you. That way, they only remember your best." It's an art few can master, the art of fading with dignity. Walken has done it beautifully. He left behind no scandal, no bitterness, no desperate attempt to stay relevant. He simply went home. And in an industry obsessed with being seen, that may be the most radical act of all. Time is the one role Christopher Walken can't escape. At 82, his once sharp features have softened. His voice, though still magnetic, carries a tremor of age. Yet his eyes, those electric blue eyes, remain unchanged. They still pierce through you, as if holding 1,000 untold stories. He often sits on the porch of his house at dusk, the sky painted in bruised purples and gold. The air smells of rain and memory. Beside him, Georgianne knits or reads. Sometimes they don't speak for hours. They don't need to. When asked if he fears death, he smiles faintly. "No," he says. "I've had a beautiful life. Strange but beautiful." He talks about the people he's lost, not with sorrow, but with gratitude. "I got to see them shine," he says. And that's enough. Each year, the world grows louder, but Walken grows quieter. He doesn't try to keep up with trends, doesn't chase roles or attention. His work now is simply being present, breathing, remembering, existing. He tends to a small garden. He paints odd, abstract images, crooked houses, faceless figures, surreal landscapes. They're not meant to make sense, he says. Neither am I. Friends say he's become philosophical about everything, even pain. It's part of the rhythm, he told one visitor. You dance through joy, you dance through sorrow. The trick is not to stop moving. And so, at 82, Christopher Walken keeps moving, not across a stage, but through time itself, step by graceful step. The weight of those years is heavy, yes, but it rests on him like a well-worn coat, familiar, warm, and earned. He may no longer dance in hotel lobbies or deliver monologues that shake the soul, but his spirit endures, in every scene he ever filmed, in every line that still echoes across generations. Because true tragedy isn't just in growing old. It's in realizing that the world rarely makes space for those who do. But Christopher Walken has made his own space, far from fame, far from the chaos, a quiet corner of the world where time moves gently, and every moment feels like a final bow. And when that curtain finally falls, he'll leave behind not just movies, but a legacy of mystery, grace, and resilience. The story of a man who never stopped being himself, even when the world couldn't quite understand who that was. For decades, Christopher Walken was treated like a curiosity. His pauses, his odd rhythm, his refusal to act like anyone else, all became part of a caricature that comedians and impressionists loved to imitate. But beneath those exaggerated impressions was a truth that took years for Hollywood to finally see. Christopher Walken wasn't strange, he was honest. He never played characters the way people expected. He didn't perform emotions, he observed them. He understood that human beings rarely say what they mean, that life itself has awkward rhythms, silences, and unfinished sentences. That, he once said, is where the truth lives. In a time when acting often meant loudness, big gestures, tearful breakdowns, Walken offered stillness. He turned discomfort into an art form. Directors like Quentin Tarantino, David Cronenberg, and Tim Burton recognized this before anyone else. They cast him not just as villains, but as mirrors, reflections of the human soul when it's stripped bare. In The Dead Zone, 1983, Walken's portrayal of a man cursed with psychic visions was heartbreakingly fragile. In Pulp Fiction, 1994, he made a single monologue about a gold watch unforgettable. And in Catch Me If You Can, 2002, his performance as Frank Bagnall Sr., a loving, broken father, earned him yet another Oscar nomination and reminded audiences that beneath his eccentricities was a heart that beat with unbearable humanity. Walken never chased trends. He once said, "If I tried to fit in, I'd be gone by now." Instead, he built a career defined by fearless authenticity. Younger actors, from Gary Oldman to Sam Rockwell, often name him as a mentor without ever having met him. His performances taught them that imperfection was beautiful, that hesitation could speak louder than words. In film schools, his name became shorthand for risk-taking. Professors would tell students, "Don't act like Walken. Learn from him." And in recent years, critics began to rewrite his legacy, not as a weird actor, but as a philosopher of emotion, a man who turned alienation into poetry. Christopher Walken didn't act to be understood. He acted to understand us. And that, perhaps, is why his performances will never age, because they're not about fame or fashion. They're about what it means to be human. There comes a time in every artist's life when the curtain begins to close, and the audience, still clapping, still cheering, doesn't realize that the performance is almost over. For Christopher Walken, that time has quietly arrived. He no longer speaks of the future with plans, but with memories. "I've done what I wanted," he said softly in a rare 2025 interview. "If I disappear tomorrow, I'll do it the same way I lived, quietly." He is not afraid of death. He has lived with ghosts all his life. The ghosts of friends gone too soon, the ghosts of roles that took a piece of him, the ghost of that night off Catalina Island that never truly left him. He sees life as theater, fleeting but beautiful. "We're all just actors in a very long play," he once mused. "Some of us stay for a few acts. Some of us exit early. But the curtain falls for everyone." He has made peace with that. These days, he sits by the window of his home, the same house he has shared with Georgianne for over 50 years. She moves slowly now, her hair silver, her laughter still soft. They hold hands more often, not out of habit, but out of gratitude. He paints strange, dreamlike pictures, figures floating through time, clocks melting, faces fading into mist. When asked what they mean, he shrugs. Maybe they're memories trying to leave. Sometimes he hums old show tunes under his breath, tapping his fingers in rhythm, the dancer inside him still alive, still moving. He once told a friend, "The body ages, but the rhythm never dies." And when the time finally comes, when the lights dim and the applause fades, he will leave the world the way he lived in it, mysteriously, gracefully, without spectacle. Because Christopher Walken has never been afraid of endings. He has always understood that beauty lives in impermanence. And perhaps that is the true tragedy, that the world doesn't yet realize what it's losing. Because someday soon, when that voice goes silent and those blue eyes close for the last time, the world will look back and understand that the strange man with the pauses and the rhythm and the mystery wasn't just an actor. He was a reminder that art, like life, is never meant to make sense. It's meant to make you feel. And in that feeling, Christopher Walken will live forever. Every great artist pays a price for their genius. For Christopher Walken, that price was solitude. To the public, he was the eccentric genius, the man with the strange rhythm and hypnotic eyes. But to those who truly looked closer, there was something else behind that stare, a quiet sadness, a loneliness that never entirely left him. All his life, he played characters who existed on the edge, outsiders, dreamers, damaged souls, and perhaps that was because he was one himself. Even in his youth, he didn't belong to the Hollywood tribe. He didn't crave fame or attention. He didn't attend premieres unless forced to. He preferred to go home, feed the cats, sit beside Georgianne, and read until the world went still. He once said, "Actors are lonely people. We spend our lives pretending to be someone else, and when the pretending stops, sometimes there's no one left." That sentence became a quiet confession. The irony of Christopher Walken's life is that his gift, his uncanny ability to inhabit other souls, often left him adrift in his own. He could play love, grief, madness, or joy with uncanny precision, but he rarely revealed his own emotions. The walls he built to protect his art also protected him from connection. Friends noticed it. They'd say, "Chris is always there, but somehow he isn't." He could make you laugh, mesmerize you with a story, then disappear behind his own silence. As he aged, that silence deepened. The industry that once celebrated him moved on to younger faces and louder voices. Walken didn't complain, he simply watched it fade. But inside, there was melancholy. The stages that once echoed with applause were now quiet. The scripts that once arrived weekly now came less often. The world was moving faster. Too fast for a man who had always preferred to linger in the pause. There is a certain heartbreak in watching brilliance go unnoticed, in knowing that the world no longer has time for mystery, for stillness, for the kind of art Walken embodied. And yet, even in his quiet decline, he remained beautiful. He still dressed neatly each morning. He still memorized poetry. He still danced, slowly, gently, only for himself. He would sway to old show tunes in his kitchen, a private echo of the dancer he once was. Georgianne would watch from the doorway, smiling softly. That is the tragedy of Christopher Walken, not scandal, not illness, not loss of fame, but the unbearable tenderness of a man who gave everything to his craft and was left, in the end, with only the silence it created. At 82, he stands not as a fallen star, but as a monument, to art, to loneliness, to the beauty of existing slightly out of step with the rest of the world. He has become what all great artists become when the noise fades, a mystery wrapped in time, waiting for us to finally understand him. If this video touched your heart, if you too felt the weight of what Christopher Walken has endured, then please take a moment to like, subscribe, and share this video. Because legends like him deserve to be remembered, not just for their fame, but for their pain, their silence, and the truth the world never saw.